Good morning, everyone. Imagine for a moment that your life is like a garden. Left unattended, weeds grow, soil hardens, and fruit becomes scarce. But when the gardener tends it, watering, pruning, planting, the garden flourishes with beauty and abundance. In the same way, our souls require careful tending. Without discipline, they dry up. With discipline, they thrive. This is the power of spiritual disciplines. They are not lifeless rituals or burdensome rules. Instead, they are life-giving practices that nourish the deepest part of who we are. First, spiritual disciplines transform us from the inside out. True change does not come merely from willpower, but from cultivating habits that align us with God's presence and purpose. Second, they open a doorway to intimacy with the divine. Through prayer, meditation, silence, or study, we create space for a sacred encounter that renews our soul. Third, these disciplines give us stability in a restless world. While society pushes us toward distraction, discipline roots us in peace, clarity, and strength. Finally, far from being restrictive, spiritual practices free us. They release us from the grip of shallow living and guide us into a life of depth, joy, and genuine purpose. Friends, our souls are not meant to run on empty. Just as our bodies need food and rest, our spirits need nourishment. The disciplines of the spiritual life are the tools that keep our inner garden flourishing, vibrant, and alive. The human soul is not a machine that runs on its own. It requires shaping, guidance, and careful attention. Just as a musician must practice scales to bring beauty out of an instrument, the soul requires disciplines to bring forth the music of a transformed life. Spiritual disciplines are not about outward performance, but about inward reality. They shape us in places where no one else can see, cultivating a kind of strength and depth that mere appearances cannot provide. When we speak of transformation, we are not speaking of a cosmetic change or a superficial improvement. True transformation is a deep reshaping of the inner being. It is the difference between trimming the leaves of a weed and pulling out its roots. Habits, struggles, and tendencies that grip us are rarely changed by sheer willpower. We may promise ourselves again and again to be kinder, to be more patient, to be less anxious, yet we find ourselves caught in the same cycles. Spiritual disciplines interrupt these patterns at the root level. There is an old story of a blacksmith who was asked how he created such beautiful works of iron. He replied, "I hold the metal in the fire until it is glowing red, then I lay it on the anvil and hammer it into shape. If it cools, I put it back into the fire. If I must, I do this 100 times. It is not my hammer that shapes it, but the fire." This is a picture of what disciplines do for the soul. They place us in the fire of God's presence again and again until we are softened, malleable, and shaped into something useful and beautiful. The hammer of circumstance may strike, but without the fire, the blows only shatter. The discipline is what makes us ready for transformation. Transformation through discipline is never about human striving alone. The disciplines simply place us where transformation can happen. They are the channels through which grace flows. One may think of a farmer. He cannot cause a seed to grow by force. He cannot make the rain fall or the sun shine. But he can till the soil, plant the seed, and create the conditions where life can flourish. Likewise, the human soul cannot transform itself by raw determination. But through practices of prayer, fasting, silence, study, and service, we prepare the soil of our hearts for the seed of divine life to grow. This is why people throughout history have found that when they practice disciplines consistently, their lives change not by effort, but almost imperceptibly. Like the gradual growth of a tree, the soul expands, deepens, and matures. Someone once remarked, "The mark of spiritual growth is not how high you soar, but how deeply you root." The disciplines take us below the surface, anchoring us where storms cannot easily uproot us. Take, for example, the practice of simplicity. Our culture thrives on excess and noise. To choose simplicity in daily living is a discipline that teaches the soul to rest in sufficiency rather than striving for more. Over time, this practice loosens the grip of anxiety and greed. One no longer needs to be driven by comparison, because the heart learns that joy is found not in abundance of things, but in abundance of grace. The change here is not external minimalism for show, but internal freedom that radiates outward. Or consider the discipline of solitude. At first, solitude may feel like emptiness, as though we are wasting time doing nothing. Yet, it is in the quiet that the clutter of our hearts begins to settle. Noise is a great cover for our inner restlessness. When we allow ourselves to be still, we encounter the reality of who we are, and in that raw place, transformation begins. One mystic once wrote, "It is in silence that God speaks the loudest." By simply choosing to step away from the endless motion of life, the soul is slowly reshaped into one that is anchored and calm rather than hurried and scattered. There is also the transformation that comes from serving others in secret. When we practice small acts of kindness without recognition, our motives are purified. The desire for applause is replaced with the joy of simply loving. In time, we no longer ask, "Who noticed what I did?" but rather, "Who was helped?" This quiet change in posture is not something we can force. It is the fruit of repeatedly submitting ourselves to the discipline of humble service until selfishness loses its hold. Transformation is not an instant event. It is a slow work, often hidden, but always real. Think of a caterpillar becoming a butterfly. No one can rush the process. But if the cocoon is broken too early, the wings will never form. In the same way, disciplines give us the cocoon in which the soul is transformed. They protect us, guide us, and over time produce a beauty that we could never have imagined. And then we turn to the second great truth, that disciplines create space for divine connection. Without them, we are often too distracted, too hurried, too noisy to notice the presence of God. The disciplines are not meant to earn God's love, but to tune our hearts to receive it. They are not ladders to climb, but windows to open. Think of prayer. Prayer is not about perfect words, but about creating a space of honesty. A young child once prayed, "Dear God, I am doing the best I can. I hope you are too." That simple prayer was not eloquent, but it was real. Through the discipline of prayer, we open ourselves again and again to a relationship that is not built on performance, but on presence. Over time, prayer changes from being an activity we perform to a life we live. It becomes less about what we say and more about the awareness that we are never alone. Meditation, too, draws us into divine connection. When we meditate, we are not filling the mind with more noise, but emptying it so that we can hear. The psalmist said, "Be still and know that I am God." That stillness is not laziness, but attentiveness. Imagine a lake on a windy day. The waves are restless and the reflection is distorted. But when the waters grow calm, the reflection is clear. So it is with the soul. In stillness, the reflection of divine truth becomes visible. The discipline of fasting reminds us that we do not live by bread alone. By willingly denying ourselves, we discover the deeper hunger of the heart. One man who practiced fasting once said, "When I fast, I feel my hunger not only for food, but for God Himself." Fasting is not about punishment, but about awakening. It strips away our illusions and reminds us that our deepest need is not physical, but spiritual. Even the discipline of study opens a window to connection. When we study sacred writings or reflect on truth, we are not merely gathering information, but seeking transformation. A story is told of a woman who read a single line of scripture each morning and sat in silence until it sank into her. She said later, "The words became alive. They were no longer ink on paper, but food for my soul." This is what happens when we create space for divine connection through discipline. In all of this, the point is not the discipline itself, but the one to whom it points. Just as a window is not the view, but the opening through which the view is seen, so disciplines are not the end, but the means. They prepare us to encounter a presence greater than ourselves. Without them, we risk going through life skimming the surface, never entering the depths. With them, we create sacred rhythms that align us to the heartbeat of God. The truth is, our souls are easily crowded. Worries, desires, ambitions, distractions, they all compete for attention. Disciplines clear the clutter. They do not earn grace, but they make room for it. Like clearing a path through a forest, they open the way for us to walk unhindered. This is why the great teachers of old emphasized practice, not occasional attempts, but steady rhythm. For just as one does not learn to play an instrument by touching it once in a while, one cannot grow spiritually by dabbling occasionally. Transformation and connection come to those who are willing to practice, to return again and again, even when it feels ordinary. Over time, the ordinary becomes extraordinary. A whispered prayer becomes a moment of communion. A short fast becomes a revelation of dependence. A quiet act of service becomes a glimpse of divine love. The soul begins to awaken, and the one who practices finds that transformation and connection are not two separate gifts, but two sides of the same grace. The world around us is restless. Noise fills every corner, and the pace of life never seems to slow. We live surrounded by constant distraction, screens glowing late into the night, endless conversations without depth, the push and pull of ambition, fear, and desire. And in the midst of this whirlwind, the soul often feels scattered, pulled in 100 directions, longing for a place of rest. Spiritual disciplines become an anchor in such a world. They are not escapes but moorings, keeping us steady when the waves of chaos threaten to carry us away. One ancient saying puts it simply, "Be like a tree planted by streams of water." A tree rooted deeply does not panic when the wind blows or the seasons change. Its strength does not come from avoiding storms, but from drawing nourishment from a deeper source. In the same way, when we practice spiritual disciplines, our souls develop roots. They run deep below the surface, where storms cannot reach. We still face the winds of anxiety, the floods of temptation, and the droughts of discouragement, but we are not easily shaken. Think of the discipline of daily prayer. On its own, it may feel small, even unimpressive, but prayer repeated day after day, year after year, is like laying stone upon stone until a strong foundation is built. When crisis strikes, when fear knocks, the person who has prayed faithfully is not suddenly scrambling to learn how. They already know the voice of God because they have listened in both quiet mornings and sleepless nights. Their anchor holds, not because life is easy, but because discipline has tethered them to something deeper than circumstance. There is a story told of a lighthouse keeper who lived on a rugged coast. His job was to keep the light burning through the night so that ships at sea would not crash against the rocks. Some nights were calm, others stormy, but every evening he climbed the stairs and tended the flame. Sailors who passed by never saw the keeper's labor, they only saw the steady light guiding them home. In much the same way, the quiet practices of the spiritual life, reading, praying, fasting, serving, become a steady flame. They keep us and others from wreckage when life grows dark. Anchoring disciplines also give clarity. When the world is loud with conflicting voices, solitude or meditation clears the fog. When decisions weigh heavy, fasting sharpens discernment. When fear whispers lies, scripture study reminds us of truth. These are not magical shortcuts, but steady practices that calm the inner storm. A wise person once said, "The noise of the world is the music of its bondage." Discipline teaches us to hear a different melody, the gentle whisper of freedom and peace. Yet, some people see discipline as restrictive, as though it narrows life into rigid boxes. But the reality is the opposite. Disciplines are not chains, they are keys. They do not bind us, but free us. A musician bound to no practice may seem free, but the moment he touches the instrument, his so-called freedom is revealed as limitation. Only the disciplined musician who has trained fingers and tuned ears can truly play with freedom. Discipline, then, is the path not to less joy, but to greater. This is why the final truth is so crucial. Spiritual practices lead to authentic freedom. They loosen the grip of the things that enslave us. Many believe they are free because they can choose anything they want, but often they are trapped by habits, by desires, by fears. The one who cannot go a day without their entertainments is not free. The one who cannot live without constant approval is not free. The one who cannot resist anger or envy is not free. Freedom is not the absence of limits, but the presence of inner mastery. Disciplines create that mastery. Consider the discipline of simplicity once more. At first, it may feel like restriction, choosing not to indulge, choosing to live with less. But as one practices it, a new joy appears. No longer are they bound by endless craving or comparison. They find themselves lightened, no longer dragged down by possessions or worries about them. A woman once said after simplifying her life, "I never knew how heavy my things were until I laid them down." What looked like loss became freedom. Or take the discipline of confession. Speaking the truth of one's heart, bringing hidden struggles into the light, seems like surrendering power. But in reality, secrecy enslaves the soul, while honesty liberates it. One man who practiced confession regularly said, "I thought I would feel smaller, but I became lighter. I no longer carried chains I could not see." What felt at first like limitation became the doorway to true freedom. Even fasting, which denies the body for a time, paradoxically liberates. The one who fasts learns that they are not mastered by appetite. They discover that hunger need not control them, and in that discovery lies freedom. They can say no to what enslaves, yes to what gives life. The soul learns to desire rightly, rather than to be ruled by desire. It is the same with service. To serve others without expectation of reward might look like losing freedom. Yet the one who serves finds that they are set free from selfishness. They no longer need to guard their image or hoard their resources. In pouring themselves out, they find a freedom that self-preservation could never grant. A story is told of a young student who was sent to care for the elderly in a small village. He thought it would be a burden, but later he said, "I went to give them life, and they gave me mine." The freedom of service revealed itself in love. The paradox is clear. Disciplines that appear restrictive actually enlarge the soul. By practicing them, we are freed not only from harmful habits, but from shallow living. Life gains depth, meaning, and richness. A person without discipline may chase every pleasure, but still feel empty, like drinking salt water to quench thirst. But a disciplined soul learns the taste of true joy. One ancient teacher once compared discipline to a trellis. A trellis itself bears no fruit, but it gives structure for a vine to grow. Without it, the vine sprawls on the ground, tangled and vulnerable. With it, the vine climbs upward, receives sunlight, and produces abundance. Disciplines are the trellis of the soul. They do not give life by themselves, but they provide the structure in which life can flourish. And within that structure, freedom blossoms, not the freedom of chaos, but the freedom of fruitfulness. The anchors of discipline steady us in chaos, and the paths of discipline free us from chains. Together, they offer a life that is not shallow but deep, not restless but peaceful, not enslaved but free. In practicing them, we discover that what once felt heavy becomes light, what once felt narrow becomes spacious, and what once felt ordinary becomes sacred. So, I ask you today, will you let your soul be untended, or will you take up the disciplines that bring true life? The choice you make will determine the harvest you reap. Thank you.